If your gardening goal is to make a garden that has non-stop color for as many months as possible, this video is for you. I'm here in Westchester, Pennsylvania, Zone 6B, 7A, in my sun-soaked south-facing garden bed. It's not a big garden space, but it is absolutely jam-packed full of plants that produce colorful flowers starting in late April, and I always have something flowering literally non-stop from late April all the way through October. So let me share with you 5 tips or 5 pieces of advice that I've learned while gardening here for the last 5 years, creating this lovely little garden. Now, while not every single plant is blooming that entire period of time, there's always some plants that are going to be blooming in my garden throughout that long period. And that's what allows this garden space to remain so interesting throughout the seasons. So we're here in the middle of June in my garden, and you can see there's a lot of beautiful blooming plants right at this moment, but you can also tell that there's quite a bit of repetition going on. Now, my first tip is that you absolutely, if you want to have that non-stop flower power from late spring through autumn, you're going to need to really think about creating a wonderful variety of different plants. But don't go overboard. You don't just want to go and put a million different kinds of plants, because that'll end up creating a little bit of a scattered energy in your garden. So you want to have a nice variety, but you also want to enable yourself to repeat some of the plants over throughout your garden, because that's what's going to allow your garden to have a unified sense, a harmonious energy throughout. That's going to make it feel more like a garden rather than just a collection of whatever you can find and put into the garden. You can clearly tell I have a lot of repetition in things like my lavenders, my Shasta daisies, some of my ground covers, my irises, my yarrows. So having that repetition rather than just a single plant of each kind of variety, that's what's really going to create the feeling of a garden. Now, the second thing is to ensure you have patience and that you are very observant. Those are 2 of the main qualities that you need to be a good gardener. So as I started this garden over 5 years ago, I didn't just try to fill it all at once. I slowly started to fill it, and I watched it evolve over time, looking for gaps in that flowering period, and then doing research in the off season, the winter time, on how I could fill those gaps. So take pictures, take videos, look for when you don't have something blooming in your garden, and try to figure out plants that will fill those gaps that you can go and plant next season. You can see how this garden has evolved over time. I'm consistently adding plants, but I'm also not afraid to take plants out that don't serve my purpose. One large plant that I recently took out was this big butterfly bush. It was beautiful, but it had a lot of maintenance, and every time I had to go and deadhead the old flowers, I was constantly stepping on the plants, so I decided it was easier for me to just take it out. Now, the third tip is to focus on plants that are considered rebloomers or continuous rebloomers. Those are plants that are going to produce a nice flush of flowers, and then by simply shearing back the old flowers or by occasional deadheading, their plants are able to continuously produce new flowers. Those are the type of plants that are going to allow you for the longest season of interest. So for a garden that wants that non-stop flower power, I'm not going to include things like a peony, who blooms for 10 days and then it doesn't provide any flowers after that. I'm going to stick with plants like my dianthus, which blooms early in the season. I can shear it back. A month later, it's going to produce another flush of flowers, or my hardy geraniums, or my coreopsis. Plants that are able to bloom repeatedly throughout the season are going to allow you to really densely pack in plants that have that gusto. Or other plants like my yellow rose, which is currently not in bloom. As I just finished deadheading it, in the next few weeks, it'll start to produce a new flush of flowers. So investing your energy and time in plants that are rebloomers are definitely going to allow you to have more flowers for longer periods of time, but flowers are the most labor-intensive part of a garden, so you're going to want to stay on top of your routine maintenance, namely that deadheading. Now, while you could probably figure out how to create a garden with lots of different daisy-shaped flowers that bloom successively throughout the season, that's gonna end up being pretty boring garden. So my fourth tip is to have a nice variety of different types of plants, namely shrubs and vines, herbaceous perennials, ground covers, bulbs, even ornamental grasses. All of these different kinds of plants will serve different structural importances and create a richer plant community with different shapes, different foliage type, different flower types. The shrubs will provide the bulk, the ground covers are going to generate an interesting ground plane, the herbaceous perennials will bring the majority of the blooms, your bulbs can be tucked in between plants for an increased interest. Having all of these different kinds of plants, like having that repetition of certain flowering plants, is going to create a more unified, harmonious energy in your garden. And my fifth and final tip is don't forget about the evergreens. The evergreen plants that you put into your garden are going to act like the frame around a painting or the negative space in a photo, which allows for the colors to be even more richly noticed. Not to mention the evergreens will also provide you some winter interest, which is just as important as a summer interest. So for me here in my garden, I have various hollies, I have a Taylor juniper, I have lovely evergreen ground covers, and all of these different plants really allow the colors to show up much more richly and provide a wonderful foil against those flowers. And one final bonus tip is to have one or a few high impact, long flowering annuals or tender perennials, things like portulaca, canna lilies that will bloom non-stop for the entire summer season. It's a great way to ensure just a little bit more color in your garden. So with that, now you have some actionable tips and strategies that you can start to think about that will allow you to create a more interesting, more colorful, more flowerful garden at your home. If you do have any other suggestions or questions or comments, make sure to leave them down in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for joining me here on Plant Vibrations. I'll catch you later. Ciao.